Greetings, I'm Logue, and this is Let's Talk Consciousness. And I am still going down the rabbit hole of Q Clearance Anon. But before I get to that, the purpose of these videos is a ongoing look at a variety of issues with the assumption that if reality itself is a manifestation of consciousness and perhaps we are all fundamentally connected as one thing experiencing itself subjectively, what do you do with that kind of assumption in terms of your day-to-day life and how you regard the larger world and construct some kind of model of what it all is. So I did two videos so far about Q Clearance Anon, and now I actually want to bridge it to something really different. And I don't think anybody else is bringing this up, or maybe a few people are, but and that is, if the Q Clearance Anon disclosure is correct, and there is, in a sense, a mass arrest of global elites, what does that say about people who talked about it before it happened, and specifically psychics? So I know I got to qualify that a little bit. It, I understand a lot of people would approach that subject and go, well, that's nonsense. Psychics are liars, and that's impossible. But obviously, if you're looking at life through this consciousness model, and that if we are manifesting some crazy illusion that we trick ourselves into thinking is a separate, cold, hard reality, but it really has these higher spiritual dimensions, um, if you're willing to entertain that idea, then some kind of strange phenomena seem to it allows space for considering things like psychic abilities, remote viewing, clairvoyance. I mean, all sorts of things that can seem to spring out of the idea that we create our reality through a conscious means, and that we are all consciously connected. If there is such a thing as non-local space, which you get the suggestion of that through quantum physics, that perhaps thoughts, ideas, information does perhaps travel through non-local space because there is this perhaps other aspect of reality that we don't understand or see. And if you're willing to allow for that, psychics, I mean, you have to be discerning, and I think you do have to look at it in a kind of skeptical way, which is, for me, I would listen and not really make determinations about how I felt, whether it was true or false. And then I did pose questions to a few psychics just to see what I would get back, and with some I was really impressed with the answers that I got. I'm not going to go into that, but so with that in mind, there's one particular psychic who did an hour-long private session with somebody that was posted online, and I'll link to it, where the person asking questions has about 25 questions or so about a mass arrest of the elite, or the cabal was the term that she used, and a financial reset. And considering how much talk is going on about Bitcoin, like that seems to be, or cryptocurrency in general, that seems to be kind of an interesting prediction from, it was August 22nd of 2016. Now those ideas were around at that time, so it's not like they were only being referenced here and then suddenly it came about. But the interesting thing is just some of the ideas that came out in this discussion. So I took notes and I'm just gonna read through. The thing I would say about watching the video is that in some ways it's kind of unwatchable. It's, I mean, not to everybody, but to me, sitting through what might be like a DIY YouTube documentary, or somebody doing like a channeling session or a meditation or something, or a past life regression, like these are things that are not really presentation ready. Like it's kind of raw material. And I think it does take a certain mindset to go through it dispassionately and just listen for the interesting tidbits and not judge it. So if you're watching Ivan Teller, who I linked to, um, I don't know. He just seems like a weird dude who's, breathing heavy and moving his arms around, and it's, you have to kind of put away what it looks like and just listen to the material and try to see what you make of it. So anyway, I'll just go on with the notes. So the questions are about a global financial reset and a mass arrest of the cabal, or New World Order or Illuminati. I mean, it's the idea more so than the term is important. So the first question, about 4 minutes in, what is the general situation behind the scenes financially in the world? And the answer is basically the global elites are not on the same page. So there's a lot of kind of competition and backstabbing. That kind of makes sense considering what Q is implying about what's going on now. 7 minutes in, the question is, what is up with North Korea? And I'm rephrasing. I just want to kind of make this quick and simple. And the answer is basically the U.S. is not telling the whole story with North Korea. There is hostility that is public, but there's actually more stability and civility that is hidden. So that seems interesting, and some of the implications about North Korea being somehow like a client state to the CIA. I mean, it's yet to be divulged, but I mean that's an interesting possibility. So 9 minutes in, the question is, will the mass arrest happen before or after the U.S. election? So this was in August of 2016. It was before the election, and the answer is not very likely. So that is interesting. Um, let's see here. As far as the questions that follow, um, about 10 minutes in, the question is asked, will this mass arrest be in the U.S. only, or will it affect other areas? And the answer is yes in the U.S., yes in the Middle East, somewhat in China, but the answer is that China is kind of insulated from that. Interesting, that Trump went to Asia and went to a bunch of spots to ostensibly. I mean, this is what people are now discussing about QAnon's implications and the actual news about him going to these places and what was happening, what was overlapping. So I'm not going to unpack all of that, but if you're already up to speed on all the Q stuff, then that's interesting that it involves Asia, Middle East, and the U.S. 12 minutes in, the question is asked, how long will the mass arrest take for things to calm down? And the answer is years. So, I should point out, I wanted to say this before I started. The way these things are kind of laid out, if you're following channelers, and there's a lot of them, I mean, or psychics in general, is that, I mean, you even get this in some kind of, I won't say scientific circles, but for people who are willing to entertain the idea of predicting the future, it's a set of probabilities, it seems. It's not to say that there's one definite possibility that will absolutely happen. There are greater and lesser likelihoods. So this would have been, at that moment, what was, likely to this, this consciousness. And obviously, all the time in between, things could go in different ways. There's free will involved. So, yeah, I know this is fucking weird, but I wanted to get it out there for anybody who's actually interested. So, about 12 minutes in, what would the mass arrest look like for the first week? The answer is pretty vague, and it's kind of the same. Basically, there would be kind of turmoil, but mostly in the U.S., somewhat China. Actually, interesting part is that when it gets to about 14 minutes, it's put out there that most of the elites, the really high ones, would be insulated from this, or at least would be on the run, but capable of staying basically ahead of it or outside of the real blowback, and that there would be people to take the fall. So it does make one think, if the people in the public arena of politics are really just the spokespeople and the puppets, that they would make the fall guys, obviously. So seeing the major politicians go down, it may still be possible that there are the people behind them that are staying outside of that circle of fucking whatever the shit's going down. All right, so that's 14 minutes in. Question also is, I think I might have skipped over this, but basically, oh no, here it is. If the cabal or New World Order, the Illuminati, is gone, what would happen to the Second Amendment? Like, would it be like the way the question is asked is almost like, would it be a positive thing if people just stopped needing guns? And I didn't necessarily have that take, but I just entertained the question. And the answer was, not likely, but and it seems like there's this kind of split of two possibilities, and I think we're kind of moving towards the positive one, as it seems, since a year has gone by. If there was a financial meltdown, then yes, the Second Amendment would be fucked with, probably very heavily. This is the prediction, at least. because they would have nothing else to lose at that point. If shit had really hit the fan, they wouldn't have much else to lose. And seeing that not much else to lose, this is just a kind of side tangent, made me think of like Vegas. Like, that situation seems to be so frayed at the edges and so like not managed well as those operations go, that it almost seemed like they were kind of pulling out all the stops. And then you'd have, right when the Q clearance happens and he predicted false flags, you had what seemed like sloppy, very quickly put out there shootings that, we don't know exactly yet what the origin of those is, but if they are false flags, it does kind of seem like as they maneuver to get away from this thing, they are kind of pulling out all the stops. And then I'll actually go on yet another tangent. As like David Seaman points out, you've got like people reporting all these sonic booms over, ramping up. They've been around for years, but like particularly ramping up lately. And the numbers of people reporting them are kind of getting like crazier and crazier. He said thousands. I actually did not go to verify that, so I was trying to find articles and I kind of ran out of time. But that's an interesting possibility. I don't really have all the info on that, but it seems like, if there were fucking crazy weather modification weapons or whatever, and like just to throw more chaos in the mix, they're just setting off all these fucking explosions or whatever. I don't know. That's a weird one. I have no real context for that. But yeah, there seems to be this real like split. Like if there's no financial meltdown, it's not generally going to get that much worse. But if there is, then it would kind of get really shitty, and that it would move more toward dictatorship. And then the other thing was, if it doesn't move toward dictatorship and there's a financial reset, but not like a collapse or a meltdown, that that you'd have a government that was actually quite scared shitless of the public at that point. Like they already are to some extent because the people are armed, but you'd have a new situation where they really felt like they were being watched really closely and like really with a gun to their head, so that you actually might see some turnaround in terms of like services actually being rendered by the government in the ways that they're not being now. That's interesting. Bear with me. All right, so that was all my notes on that session. I did this twice actually to hope that I didn't miss anything, but it's an interesting lark, if you're willing to entertain those ideas and you're interested in consciousness. Actually, I have more notes. Sweet. Let's see where I left off because I did this twice. Now I'm matching it back up to where I left off. Thank you for bearing with me in this really boring moment of non-content. Okay, so one thing that's I think true, and it's being implied by Q Clearance Anon, is that for real serious change, it has to be exposed. People have to become familiar with the things that are going on. So that is a real integral part of putting these things behind us, is that people do have to see them, which is crazy, but I think that's what's happening. It can be easy. One of the things he said is that it can be easy, more so if we are willing to look at it and with a kind of peaceful disposition ourselves. I know that sounds crazy, but again, with this consciousness model, your own inner state, as you manifest the reality around you, it seems, your state of being inside actually will be reflected back to you by the world around you. That's one of these kind of new agey Eastern philosophy ideas, but that is something that's reflected in the session, and I think that's quite likely. Would there be a new digital currency? Yes, but also gold and silver as the standard backing currency would come back. That was set at about the 28-minute mark. Inflation, yes, that is the prediction, is that there will be quite a bit of inflation. That's pointed out at the 30-minute mark if you're going back and listening to it. One thing that's pointed out, and I think this actually kind of strangely relates to some other material regarding Donald Trump, but that there would, because of the things kind of coming about the way they do, there would be more people on welfare, but not necessarily in a negative way, just that there would be a little bit of easement as far as people really having a hard time. Let's see here. Oh, this was a good question. In the midst of all this, particularly a financial reset, would there potentially be credit card companies that forgave debt? And that was the answer, some, this is the 36-minute mark, some debt forgiveness, but more likely what you would see is actually banks suffering glitches where they're losing records of people's debt and it being kind of forgiven by accident. I could imagine hacking becoming a big thing. If hacking This is just my opinion now. But if hacking became like this thing where you could easily purchase the services of a hacker to go in and wipe your debt clean like that, I could kind of see that taken off. Anyway, so many credit card companies. This is a longer prediction, it seems, but credit card companies, and this gets more into the kind of consciousness ascension point of view of how things are panning out. But that credit card companies would be going away, community lending would be more popular. Question asked at the 41-minute mark: will the IRS go away? Not likely, but reform is likely. Will the cost of living go down? Yes, and it will be easier to start businesses. This is, again, these are just predictions, but this is the tone of what I think is interesting and kind of compatible to the Q stuff, is that potentially there is another side to a Trump presidency, and it's, I know I'm kind of shooting for the moon as far as like now attributing economic growth to it and things like that, but I think it would be interesting to see if there was a kind of economic turnaround, because if he really was party to taking down, you know, deep state criminals, perhaps it's not that far-fetched to assume that he might also have good intentions for the country as a whole. But I know people would just hear that and go like, you're fucking insane, what the fuck are you smoking? And it's obvious I'm just smoking lots of weed, nothing else. Actually, at the 44-minute mark, the question is asked, and the answer, I don't have the question phrased, but the question is answered that there will be a lot of banking cartel figures who have their assets seized, and we are kind of seeing that with Saudi Arabia, that they are seizing assets. Um, when will the black projects come to an end? That's asked at the 46-minute mark. And, oh no, I'm sorry, the question I didn't get, but the answer was basically when black projects are exposed and their siphoning off of money comes to an end for certain things, that money makes its way back into the economy. That's at least the positive prediction, if you'll take that at face value. Totally strange and separate question from this topic, but then gets into crypto. The question is asked, who invented Bitcoin? And an interesting answer, more than one person. Seemingly there is one person who is kind of the spearhead behind it, or a prominent sort of lead, and that it was not really to be known. And there are people who might know actually the answer to this, because I didn't bother to look up who makes cryptocurrency. It wasn't really a hot topic for me, but I just thought the answer was cool. So if somebody has that answer and this is total bullshit, you know, just post it in a comment. I'll hear it out. But anyway, so if it is unknown who made cryptocurrency, that's an interesting answer. That it was made kind of behind closed doors, and that it may have actually had positive and negative purposes. The negative purposes, which to me seems plausible, would be a new source of money laundering. That makes a lot of sense. If cryptocurrency, you know, was somehow related to any kind of effort from the deep state, that would at least explain why. But the light purpose being that, you know, sort of the white hat elites who might be behind cryptocurrency, that it would be to kind of create some relief from fiat currency. And then, you know, actually there was another session I did. This is getting really long. There was another session that I went over and made notes for, which was basically a prediction about Donald Trump, and it was questions, you know, to this like higher consciousness about Donald Trump, and just one interesting answer that I think relates, that's interesting, and it's just food for thought. Don't fucking, you know, don't shoot the messenger. But the idea that part of the reason that Donald Trump chose to run, again, if Q is to be taken at all seriously, the idea that he might have positive intentions, that to some extent he did actually care about what kind of country he would be leaving behind for his grandkids, and, you know, for just the sort of character of the country as a whole, that seeing how the country has been manipulated and exploited, that he might actually give a shit about seeing it kind of the way he would have liked to see it in his generation. Because I know people of that age, I mean, my dad's about the same age as him, they have a very fucking fond, you know, rosy vision of what America is all about, and I think that's way more complicated than it seems. But for people who like that vision of America, it's not that crazy to think that they might want to bring it back. And I know, yeah, I know already. People would very quickly point out the civil rights problems, the sexism, things like that. Obviously, not with those things, but actually, one thing in real life that I think kind of is a way of tying it into something real is, and I'll put a link to it. Son of Newo posts this half-hour long like analysis of this political ad that, by his argument, won Trump the election. I'm not necessarily so convinced, but it's just this really effective ad. But when you analyze it, it's basically saying, for whoever made it, because that's unknown, or maybe it is saying these are the key events of like when the deep state started really fucking with the country. You know, killing JFK, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, it points them out in these very quick edits of clips that he goes over and explains. And it's basically a message to the deep state saying, like, we're taking it back. And that's a kind of encouraging, hopeful thing. It might be a complete, whitewash of what's happening right now. It could be a complete naive hope for the future, but I think it's an interesting possibility that some number of people look at what's happened since World War II and the Cold War to now and have just had enough and are actually doing something about it. And we can all help by talking about it. And even if it is maybe some sort of uh, false origin, perhaps in of all of us really speaking it to life, that there may actually be some potential into seeing something serious happen. But I'll wrap it up there and just say, don't be afraid to look at unsettling things. Sometimes bringing light to dark places is really the way out. So much love.